Most people think they're prepared. They have a flashlight somewhere in a drawer, maybe a few extra cans of soup in the pantry. They think if something happens, we'll figure it out. But here's what I've learned after spending months researching this properly. Real preparedness is not about panic. It's not about building a bunker. It's about being quietly, calmly, completely ready when the store shelves look different than usual. And right now, in 2026, the reasons to get serious about your food supply have never been more real or more practical. Prices are unpredictable. Supply chains are still fragile in ways most people don't see until it's too late. And the 5 foods I'm going to walk you through today. These aren't dramatic or exotic. These are the ones that people who actually know what they're doing quietly stock at home. The ones that are affordable, shelf-stable, and genuinely useful when life gets complicated. I've been looking into this for a long time. I've talked to people who work in food distribution. I've read the retail reports. I've dug into what actually runs out first when there's a storm, a shortage, or a sudden spike in prices. And what I found surprised me, because the best survival foods aren't the flashy, expensive freeze-dried kits that companies want you to buy. They're much simpler than that. Stay with me, because number 4 on this list is one most people completely overlook, and it might be the single most important one of all. Before we get into it, if you find this kind of insider knowledge useful, hit subscribe right now. I put out content like this regularly, and most people who watch this channel tell me they wish they found it sooner. Let's get into it. Item number 1. White rice. This one might seem obvious, but I want to talk about it in a way that most people don't. Because the question isn't whether you should have rice. Everyone knows rice is important. The question is how much, what kind, and why most people are storing the wrong amount of it. White rice, not brown rice, not wild rice, white rice, has an extraordinary shelf life when it's stored properly. We're talking 25 to 30 years in sealed conditions. Brown rice, by contrast, goes rancid within 6 to 12 months because of the natural oils in the bran layer. I learned this the hard way. I'd been storing brown rice for years thinking I was making the healthier choice, and then I read through actual food science research on long-term storage and realized I'd been doing it wrong the whole time. The data is clear. Properly sealed white rice, stored in food-grade buckets with oxygen absorbers or in mylar bags, remains safe and nutritious for decades. That's not a marketing claim. That's backed by food preservation studies and real-world evidence from people who've opened rice, stored 20-plus years later, and found it perfectly edible. I looked into this more closely last year, when rice prices jumped noticeably at several major retailers including Walmart and Costco. The 25-pound bags that used to be one price had quietly bumped up, and not everyone noticed right away, but I did. And I started paying attention to where rice prices were trending globally. The answer wasn't comfortable. Rice is one of the most traded agricultural commodities in the world, and when producing countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, experience weather disruptions or policy changes around exports, the effects ripple outward within months. We've seen that pattern repeat in recent years, and there's no reason to assume it won't happen again. Here's what I'd recommend. Get yourself at least 25 to 50 pounds of long-grain white rice per person in your household. Store it in food-grade 5-gallon buckets with Gamma Seal lids, or use mylar bags with oxygen absorbers inside those buckets. Keep it in a cool, dark, dry location. A basement or interior closet is ideal. The practical math is simple. A pound of dry white rice provides roughly 1,600 calories when cooked. 50 pounds gives one adult nearly 6 weeks of caloric foundation if rationed carefully. That's not a luxury. That's a foundation. You don't want to be the person in your neighborhood who suddenly realizes they don't have any. Item number 2. Honey. Most people think of honey as a condiment, something you drizzle on tea or put on toast. They don't think of it as a survival food. That's a mistake. Honey is the only natural food that truly does not spoil. Archaeologists have found honey in ancient Egyptian tombs, thousands of years old, that was still edible. The reason is chemistry. Honey's low moisture content, natural hydrogen peroxide production, and acidic pH create an environment where bacteria and mold simply cannot survive. This isn't a folktale. It's documented food science. But here's where it gets more interesting from a practical standpoint. Honey isn't just calories. It has genuine antimicrobial properties that have been used medicinally for centuries. In situations where medical supplies are limited, raw honey, particularly varieties like Manuka, has legitimate applications for wound care, sore throat relief, and digestive support. I'm not telling you to throw out your first aid kit. I'm telling you that honey does more work than a jar of sugar would. I started looking into honey prices more seriously when I noticed that the retail price for a standard 32-ounce jar had climbed significantly at most grocery stores over a 3-year span. Part of this is the ongoing stress on honeybee populations worldwide, which affects production volume. Part of it is just broader inflation. Either way, the trajectory has been consistently upward. When I checked prices at Sam's Club and Costco last season compared to 2 years prior, the difference was meaningful enough that I made a point to buy larger quantities, while prices were still relatively reasonable. Here's what I'd suggest. Aim for at least 10 to 15 pounds of raw honey per household. Store it in glass or food-grade plastic containers at room temperature away from direct sunlight. If it crystallizes, that's completely normal. It hasn't gone bad. Just warm the jar gently in a bowl of warm water, and it returns to liquid. The investment you make in honey today is one of the few purchases that genuinely only gets more valuable over time. This isn't something to wait on. Item number 3, dried lentils. Here's where I want to pause and be honest with you about something I got wrong for a long time. I used to think of lentils as something other people ate, a vegetarian thing, not particularly relevant to how I actually cooked or what my family actually liked. And then I spent some time really understanding what lentils provide, and I changed my mind pretty completely. Lentils are one of the most nutritionally complete plant-based foods that exist. They're loaded with protein, about 18 grams per cooked cup, along with iron, folate, potassium, and complex carbohydrates that provide sustained energy rather than a quick spike and crash. In a situation where your food options are limited, lentils fill gaps that rice and honey cannot fill on their own. What makes them exceptional as a survival food is the combination of shelf life, nutrition, and cook time. Unlike dried beans, lentils require no soaking. They cook in 20 to 30 minutes. That's significant when fuel or energy might be limited. And stored in airtight containers with oxygen absorbers, dried lentils maintain quality for up to 10 years or more. I came across this more practically when a close friend of mine who works in humanitarian food aid explained to me what organizations actually distribute in crisis scenarios. It's not elaborate food. It's rice, lentils, and oil. The foods that provide maximum nutrition per pound, cook reliably, and don't require refrigeration or complex preparation. That conversation stayed with me. The price situation with lentils is also worth noting. As of 2025 into 2026, lentil prices have been subject to the same pressure as most dry goods, modest but real increases tied to shipping costs, agricultural production variability, and general food inflation. Buying ahead of that curve is not paranoia, it's just smart budgeting. I'd recommend getting 20 to 30 pounds of dried green or red lentils per person. Green lentils hold their shape better when cooked, which is useful for heartier meals. Red lentils break down quickly, which is great for soups and porridges that stretch further. Having both is ideal. You don't need to overhaul your entire diet around lentils, but having them as a pillar of your emergency supply gives you protein security that carbohydrates alone cannot offer. That matters more than most people realize until they actually need it. Item number 4, rendered animal fat. I told you this one would surprise you. This is the one most people completely overlook. And it might be the most important survival food on this entire list, not for the reason you'd expect. Let me explain. When people think about emergency food, they think about calories from carbohydrates. Rice, pasta, crackers. What they dramatically underestimate is the role of dietary fat. Fat is not just a calorie source. It's essential for hormone production, vitamin absorption, brain function, and long-term energy regulation. In a caloric deficit situation, cutting fat is one of the fastest ways to impair judgment, mood, and physical function. Rendered animal fat, lard from pork, tallow from beef, was the dominant cooking fat in America until the mid-20th century. It was displaced largely by vegetable oils through a combination of marketing, agricultural policy, and some scientific claims that have since been significantly revised. The practical reality is this. Lard and tallow have good shelf lives when stored properly. They have high smoke points that make them excellent for cooking under almost any condition, and they are extremely calorie-dense. A single tablespoon of lard contains about 115 calories. In a situation where every calorie matters, whether that's a power outage, a disruption to grocery access, or simply a period of financial strain, being able to add pure, stable fat to a simple meal of rice and lentils transforms it nutritionally. Fat makes food more satiating. It stretches your supply further psychologically as much as physically. When I looked into this more carefully, I found that traditionally rendered lard, not the partially hydrogenated kind you find in some grocery store shelf products, but properly rendered leaf lard or pastured tallow, stores at room temperature for months and in the refrigerator or freezer for significantly longer. You can also find it in sealed cans or jars, which extends shelf life further. Costco and some regional grocery retailers carry tallow products. A growing number of small farms and online vendors sell properly rendered leaf lard in clean packaging. I've started ordering this a few times a year and keeping it as part of my longer-term pantry. The practical takeaway here is to get at least 5 to 10 pounds of rendered lard or tallow, sealed and stored in a cool, dark space. If you want to go deeper, learn how to render your own from raw fat, which you can often get inexpensively from a butcher. Most people will never think about this until they need it. You're thinking about it now. That's the difference. Item number 5. Salt. I want to be direct with you about something. If you walked into your kitchen right now and someone asked you how much salt you really have, not the little shaker on the table, what would your honest answer be? For most people, it would be a few ounces at most. Maybe a standard container from the grocery store. Enough for a week of cooking, maybe 2. That is not enough. Not even close. Salt is not just a seasoning. Salt is essential to human survival at a physiological level. Your body cannot regulate fluids properly, fire nerve signals, or contract muscles without adequate sodium. You cannot preserve food without salt. You cannot make fermented foods, which are an important secondary food preservation method, without salt. Historically, salt was so valuable it was used as currency. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in it. That's where the word salary comes from. In a scenario where grocery access is disrupted, salt becomes immediately strategic. It's what allows you to preserve meat, vegetables, and other perishables that would otherwise spoil. It's what makes simple, bland emergency food palatably edible over days and weeks. Anyone who has tried eating plain rice and lentils with no seasoning for several days in a row will tell you. The psychological toll of flavorless food is underestimated. Salt stores essentially indefinitely. It does not expire. It does not go rancid. It does not require special packaging. A simple sealed container in a dry location will preserve salt for as long as you need it. This makes it one of the most cost-effective preparedness investments you can make. I did the math on this myself. A 25-pound bag of non-iodized sea salt or plain table salt from a restaurant supply store or bulk retailer costs very little. For most households, it represents months or even years of supply. The cost per pound is trivial. The strategic value is enormous. I'd recommend getting 25 to 50 pounds of salt stored in sealed containers. Consider getting both iodized and non-iodized varieties, iodized for daily use and dietary iodine, non-iodized specifically for food preservation purposes, since iodine can affect fermentation. Store it in sealed 5-gallon buckets or airtight containers to prevent clumping from humidity. Keep it somewhere dry and accessible. I cannot overstate how foundational salt is. Everything else on this list, the rice, the lentils, the fat, becomes far more livable with it. The people who think about this ahead of time are the ones who don't have to panic later. If you step back and look at what these 5 foods have in common, something becomes clear. None of them are trendy. None of them are expensive. None of them require special equipment to store or prepare. What they share is a combination of shelf stability, nutritional density, practical versatility, and historical track record. These are the foods that human civilizations have relied on during hard times for thousands of years. Not because people were unsophisticated, but because these particular foods work. White rice provides the caloric backbone. Lentils provide protein and micronutrients. Honey provides natural sugars, antimicrobial properties, and long-term stability that no other food can match. Rendered fat ensures your body can actually absorb fat-soluble vitamins and sustain energy over time. And salt. Salt is the invisible thread that ties it all together, making everything else more edible, more preservable, and more functional. The goal here is not to become someone who lives in fear. The goal is to be someone who is quietly, calmly, completely prepared for whatever comes. Price increases, weather events, supply disruptions, or any number of the ordinary unpredictabilities that 2026 keeps delivering. The people who build this foundation now are the ones who don't have to make hard decisions in the grocery store when everyone else is panicking. They just go home and open their pantry. That calm, that security, it's worth more than the actual food. It's the knowledge that you've thought ahead, that you've protected your family, that you're not dependent on the next truck arriving on time or the next price not jumping overnight. You now have that knowledge. Most people watching the news right now don't. If this video helped you see your pantry and your family's security differently, do me a favor and hit like right now. It genuinely helps this content reach people who need it. Subscribe if you haven't already. I cover topics like this regularly, things that most channels either won't talk about or simply don't know. Real pricing trends, real preparedness strategies, real information for people who want to stay ahead of the curve instead of scrambling to catch up. And drop a comment below telling me which one of these 5 items you're going to focus on first. I read every comment and I'll respond to as many as I can. Your question might end up being the topic of the next video. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself and the people around you. The fact that you watch this all the way through tells me you're the kind of person who takes this seriously. That's exactly who I make this content for. Stay prepared. Stay calm. I'll see you in the next one.